Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. Welcome everyone to the Draft Transport Stations Strategy Workshop, and a special welcome to Robert Brodnick. Thanks for coming along, Robert. I don't think we have any other guests, Gary, is that correct? It's councillors and staff. Okay. All right. So look, without any further ado, I know we've already had a busy morning on Zoom this morning, but Gary, I'll hand over to you to lead the discussion on this.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a bit of context. So this is, at least the public part of this meeting is initially to deal with Councillor Gordon's case for change and some technical commentary from the experts. Your Worship, I'll be guided by you if you think at any stage you think this should be public excluded, and thinking particularly about whether there might be a tactical response you want to discuss, or alternatively if you think because it's getting personal that you might want to protect people's integrity. So over to you as to when you think we might need to pop into public excluded. So we've got a draft transport strategy that's out for consultation. This is your plan, and we've spent quite some time going through it. Now, throughout the process, Councillor Gordon has voiced concerns about the statistical basis upon which we're using to formulate the plan. And I mean, those comments have been well raised, and we thought had been well addressed through the process. However, Councillor Gordon has conducted further review, done a tremendous amount of work on statistics, which he's circulated to everyone. And following that, Councillor Gordon asked for a meeting with Jim and I and a number of other councillors with a view to having the strategy withdrawn and then mapping out a process to take this forward. So the other thing that's happened in the last week or so is there's been a press article in the Cambridge News, which has outlined Councillor Gordon's concerns backed by the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce. No comment attributed or sought, I think, from the council in relation to its response on that, be that as it may. So look, what I suggest we do is we throw to Councillor Gordon so that he can make the case for change. Then I've invited Robert Brodnick to give an independent review of the policy process, and I haven't heard his words yet. So effectively, Robert's an expert because he's a senior principal at Becker based in Hamilton, currently the independent project director for Future Proof Metro Spatial Plan Transport Program business case, the business case lead for the Future Proof Northern Wastewater detailed business case, and he provides strategic advice to the Waipa district team preparing the Waipa community plan. So he knows Future Proof, he knows us, and he knows the business of transport. Critically, in Robert's role previously with Waikato, he was the Group Manager of Planning and Investment and the Regional Manager for Planning and Investment for the Waikato and Bay of Plenty region. So comes with very good credibility in this space. So Roger, if I could pass to you to make the case for change that you're suggesting, and then I'll get some commentary from Robert on the efficacy of our plan and the planning process, and whether we still have a robust document. Perhaps if I could just leave it at that stage for now, Roger, but over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And firstly, I want to say that I'm going to refrain totally from any personal comment. It's just purely on the documents and the stats as I see them. I don't intend to reiterate what's in those two documents. Councillors have all received them, and I'm sure they've had the opportunity to read them. Other than say that council officers' response acknowledged the deficiencies and errors that were contained in the December report that I submitted. The strategies identified in this transportation strategy are actually based on two externally generated data sets that in my mind are inaccurate and include fundamental errors. I don't believe the council have been well served at all by those two reports. This has resulted in a document, to my mind, which is unsound and not relevant to the future transport network of Cambridge. We currently have the document out for consultation. However, that consultation document does not include the relevant data sets, and hence the constituency are being asked to provide feedback, who are being asked to provide feedback, are unaware of the unsoundness of the information on which the strategy is based. I'm going to make two comments. One's an update on the Nydia projections. And it's an update because in recent meetings, we've had presentation by the St. Peter's 3M's Trust, 3M's St. Peter's joint venture, and the Bridge Trust. So we're actually now more in knowledge of the very short-term development that's going on in C2 and C3. And if you look at that, that's within the next 2, 3, 4 years. So we know that's going to happen. And if you add up the individual residential units, that comes to a total of 1,518. Even at a small density of 2.5, that's an additional population of 3,795 on top of the 2018, puts that up to 4,295 in that section. Now, the Nydia projection, the Hautapu SC2 area in that Nydia shows only a population of 1,142 by 2025 and a population of 3,416 by 2035. So even that Nydia projection 10, 15 years out doesn't reflect what the population is going to be in the short term. So I think that the traffic movements that are generated by that increased considerable population has a material impact on the movements in the transport network. The second point is just to emphasize the errors that are acknowledged in the transport strategy. And these are just bullet points that I've made. The strategy does not recognize current constricted capacity on portions of the road, particularly the high-level bridge and the St. Andrews Queen Street roundabout section. It doesn't recognize the recent established traffic counts from May 21 that establish accurate current traffic volumes as a base point. And those accurate traffic counts vary considerably from the base point used in the WTRM. It doesn't recognize current and future levels of lower quality of service on these portions of our main arterial network. So both the bridge and the St. Andrews Queen Street roundabout have a very low level of service through the congestion. It doesn't predict the impact of overcapacity from those two areas, of redirected traffic from that main arterial onto the rest of the network. Now, my comments are that the quantity of that redirected traffic will be considerable on other parts of the roading network, local roads and feeder roads. And we need to know that in terms of assessing whether the strategy is valid. It doesn't recognize recent network changes, Hall and Grey Street, and the impact of redirected traffic flow. It doesn't recognize future land use changes and associated traffic movements from known developments, Norfolk Downs Commercial and C3 on the main arterial network. That's an error in the strategy. It says they're going to go to Swain Street and it says they're going to go out Not using accurate current vehicle movements and reliable future growth to predict the capacity on the bridge, restrictions on combined cross-river bridge traffic. So what I'm saying there is these changes, the lower projection, or the underestimation of population, and those relocated traffic movements from the capacity sections is going to have a major impact on the combined traffic going across the two bridges and the capacity of those bridges. Both the understatement of population growth adjacent to Hamilton-Cambridge Road and the fundamental errors in the WTRM traffic predictions are substantial, and their relevance to the strategy is immediate. With the increased pace of growth of Cambridge in the next 3 to 5 years, and we know what that is, the impact of not addressing these failings will be considerable in the efficiency and the effectiveness of the Cambridge traffic network. We have been presented with a strategy which, to my mind, is already outdated and does not address the challenges of one of New Zealand's fastest growing rural large towns. Waiting for another review will be too late, because the opportunities for addressing the network will be overtaken by the growth of Cambridge. Cambridge can't afford to have that happen. I think we need to address this now. Hope that hasn't taken too long of the valuable time for discussion.
No, Roger, it's certainly it's outlined your concerns, and I suppose, look, this is a transportation strategy for the whole district, but I would just, obviously those issues about accuracy and the basis for what for how the strategy was developed, it's important to have the counter perspective on that. So, Gary, is Robert going to handle that, or is Brian or Dawn?
So, Jim, I thought I'd throw it to Dawn to choreograph the technical responses to the issues that Roger's raising, but probably appropriate to start with a comment from Robert anyway.
Thanks, Robert.
Okay. Oh, look, so in terms of my role in here, I haven't been directly involved in the transport strategy. I've been asked to comment on the issue of the population projections and the policy directions in the draft strategy and the next steps, if you like. So to be clear, and doing my professional expert witness kind of introduction, I am not a statistician and I have not delved into the detail of the transport modelling. So I'm not in a place to comment on those technicalities. What I've done is looked across the issue and the pathway forward more from the policy direction and the process and the next steps that are proposed in the strategy, and whether they look to be what I would expect to see in a document at this stage in the process and at this place in the strategy hierarchy. But first off, on the Nydia projections, I think there's a key word there. They're projections. They're not and shouldn't be taken as gospel. And I think you'd find that the authors would be quite careful to have written provisos and qualifications around the projections, particularly in the context of we're working off imperfect census data. So the last census, as we all know, wasn't as comprehensive as past censuses. So what you do with an outfit like Nydia, and Stats NZ have had to do the same and come up with not dissimilar projections, is they're having to work off a whole lot of assumptions and projections based on past trends looking forward. So I suppose that's a key part of saying, yes, if you poke and prod any of these projections, you will find that they are not 100% accurate and that they don't they don't represent the truth as it is today. They are simply modelled projections. Having said which, we have to, as policymakers, work on something. We can't seek perfect numbers for every piece of work that we do. Otherwise, we'd never get policy through, as I'm sure you're aware. And what's important about the context of the Nydia projections at the moment is that they underpin all of Future-Proof's work. They underpin the entirety of Council's long-term plan. And I suppose they are seen as best practice. So Nydia is also used in smart growth. It's used by all of your Future-Proof partners. And unpicking those projections in isolation puts us in a place as a district, as a region, where we start to lose confidence in the numbers that we're doing all of our planning around. So it's a issue you poke with care, and you have a real think about the consequences of what you're doing, given that they are simply projections, and you know, the day they're published, projections are not going to be 100% accurate. So there's a risk assessment to be done, and whether your concerns about the projections are worth unpicking a whole lot of strategic directions, and whether they are of such moment that they merit unpicking strategic directions, and as I say, potentially reducing confidence in all of your long-term plan and in Future-Proof. And from a government investor point of view, that's the kind of thing that worries government investors. In my past life, if I found that a region didn't have alignment around the population projections off which it was basing its planning, we would generally have less confidence in making investment decisions in that region. So that kind of having that one source of the truth is really, really important, and making sure that that source of the truth and that view is aligned across all of the partners within a spatial region. So that's my kind of first point on projections. And on the modelling side of things, the Waikato Regional Transport Model, I'm aware there's a business case in preparation at the moment for its upgrade and review. I suspect Dawn or Brian are across that more than I am. But it is, again, it's a model, and it's only as good as the assumptions and the data that goes into the model, and the purpose of that review is to update those assumptions and projections. So in terms of the transport strategy, and this is more the angle that in reviewing this issue I've come from. So the transport strategy is a sound document. It identifies all the issues and interventions at a level appropriate for a district-wide strategy, in my view. And notwithstanding that the numbers we may not have internal alignment over the numbers and agreement over the numbers, one of the key moves that it recommends as a first action is an investigation into the need for an additional crossing as part of a business case, which is really the first step in the process to getting a designation and a notice of requirement, and getting your evidence base up to a standard that would persuade Waikato to invest in what will be an expensive piece of infrastructure for the district, and also in terms of getting you through any Resource Management Act challenges to a designation. I'm kind of minded of a phrase of Ken Tremaine, my predecessor in these roles, where he would constantly come back to a soundbite that striving for perfection is the enemy of progress. So I look at this issue, and I look at the recommendation in the transport strategy that you move forward with a business case to look at the crossing and say, well, getting perfection over the numbers, is that going to get us to a business case any faster? Is it going to get us to an investment conversation with Waikato any faster? or is it something to pick up in the next stage? And then I move to how does the Waka Kotahi's business case process work? So the first step Waka Kotahi says in its guidance around business cases is to get your problem definition right, to examine all of your data, to bring your data up to date. So the issues that Councillor Gordon's raised are things I would fully expect the business case to test and test early in the process. So that as part of that commissioning conversation almost. If it's not being already refined through the Waikato Regional Transport Model refinements and the work that Futureproof will be doing. So I think the issues that are being raised and the need for real-time data in terms of how is the network performing using Bluetooth data and things like that today is kind of critical data that if you want to move this issue forward, I'd be starting to gather now in preparation for a conversation with Waka Kotahi about co-investing in a detailed business case. So the steps of the process really are, you do a detailed business case arising out of this strategy, and I suspect the need for a business case like this will be recommended in the Futureproof Metrospatial Plan transport business case as well. You would expect that business case to look for additional evidence about the problem. You would expect it to examine the full range of interventions necessary to achieve the outcomes you're after. I would expect that to look at walking and cycling access across the river, to look at public transport within Cambridge, given the scale of growth, looking at all of the ways that you can minimise trips across the river. And as well, Waka Kotahi will be in a space at the moment under its current government policy statement that it's unlikely to want to co-invest in a bridge anytime soon. It'll come back to you with some lines around let's optimise the infrastructure we've got now. Let's think about our climate change emissions. Let's think about urban form and placemaking. How much more can we do to get walking and cycling working? How much more can we do to get mode shift for those trips within Cambridge happening? And once we've done all that, if the network's still not functioning, then let's have a think about what we need in terms of additional infrastructure. So I suspect that's the way your business case conversation will go with Waka Kotahi. And then I suppose when we play the next step forward, once you've done the business case, you've worked out the alignment for a crossing, you've got Waka Kotahi's support for it to happen, to be built sometime in the future, which I'm assuming you would get, having done all that work, answered all their questions, you would need to move into an RMA designation process. And you need the evidence that you've collected through that detailed business case process, plus additional evidence that you'll have to gather in terms of more detailed geotech work and soils work and biodiversity work and assessments against Te Ture Paimana in order to get your designation in place. So I suppose that's a long way of saying the strategy says we need to do a business case. That's probably, to me, the next step in resolving this issue is to move forward with implementing that action and the strategy at pace, recognising that you've got a whole lot of steps that you're going to need to go through in order to get yourself to a place that you can get a designation.
Thanks for that, that background, Robert. And I suppose, I was going to say you would recognise, but we all recognise that the public perception in Cambridge is that we're likely to run into problems in the near future in terms of traffic growth. And I just want to be clear in my own mind that the strategy that we've put forward enables us to move ahead at pace to look at and hopefully resolve those problems. And I appreciate your comment that the figures are not accurate, and when you make statements like that, and I recognise those, then it becomes evident that you've got to apply some local knowledge and refinements to those figures to actually come up with what the real position is. And I suppose I see this strategy as actually enabling us to refine the information that we've got there. But I would just want to be sure that the strategy wasn't putting any impediments in place to actually looking at those perceived problems that we've got in Cambridge and in other parts of the district.
As I read it, there's no impediments there. It's the first step. If I was in my NZTA role, old NZTA role, that I'd be looking for is to, well, has council got a strategy? Has it thought about what the nature of the problems it is facing in these places? And the strategy does that, and it identifies a comprehensive range of intervention. So it identifies the bridge, but it also identifies the need for public transport and walking and cycling connectivity as well. And so it's looking to take a holistic approach to solving the issues that have been identified. And it recognises that there is an issue now that the community is asking to be addressed, and that growth will impact on that. It may have got, because of the numbers used, it may have understated the issue, but that's the stuff you'll unpick through the business case.
Yeah. Thanks, Robert. So, Gary, back to you. As Dawn and Brian going to make comments now, and obviously Roger would want to make further comments, and other councillors as well with questions, but I just try and get the technical side of things on the table first.
So just before I throw to Dawn, to summarise Robert's observations, is using Nydia and WRTM is an important element of the process because it's consistent with the planning process and the sort of things that Waka Kotahi expect to see when it comes to funding these things, especially the business case, which is quite an extensive process. Acknowledging that Councillor Gordon has raised valid concerns in relation to certain growth cells in areas that don't currently fit with WRTM or Nydia projections, or don't appear to, then that is a matter that is resolved in the next stage of the process, which is the detailed business case. Is that a fair summary, Rob?
Sorry, I muted myself. Yes, that's a really good summary. Thank you, Gary.
Thanks, Robert. Dawn, throw to you for any comment.
Lovely. Thanks, Gary. Councillor Gordon raised a question around the Waikato Regional Transport Model. We're one of 7 shareholders in that model. It is a regional model, and it's what they call a strategic or macro level model. I think that with respect, the errors that Councillor Gordon has identified, I'd actually call them limitations. It's a regional model that we take that has the strategic network. I mean, that's its key focus. And we are trying to apply it to a finer level of detail within our town and urban area. And there are limitations in doing that. We've done that rather than invest in a significant amount of money in a local micro sort of model. However, work is underway to update the Waikato Regional Transport Model. So I wonder if, Brian, can you just give us a bit of an update in that piece of work that's underway in updating that model, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dawn. A model like this at any point in time, it reflects sort of current knowledge or recent knowledge around population and where jobs are, and it stores that information in cells, and there's 2,500 cells containing that data across the whole Waikato region. And it also takes inputs from the Auckland Transport Model and the Bay of Plenty Transport Model and further south, and feeds those onto the network. So at any point in time, it's got population data and jobs data and information that come from prior census, and so it will never be fully up to date, but there is a process every year where current traffic count information is used to revalidate the model and to tune it to try and make it line up with current traffic volumes as much as possible. But because it is a complex model and it covers the whole region, it does mean that that process is not being done every month or every 6 months. It's more a 12-month or an 18-month process to make those changes and validations. So as we say, it is a strategic model, and it will, from the data, make a reasonably good assessment of the number of trips that are occurring in an area, but it may not assign those trips completely accurately to the road network, because it is a strategic model, not a fine-grained model. So we do, Councillor Gordon has definitely pointed out areas where that coarseness of the model shows up with inaccurate figures for individual roads. But at the current time, the WRTM is being updated with the census data, with growth projection data and future network data. So that's where future roads and intersections will be built on the network. So each of the 7 local authorities involved all feed that data into the model. And then the model will be run again and tested and validated again later this year. So that updated model will be available for any future business case work we do. And we can also use that model in a way where we take the trip data out of it and then we assign it manually to the network to get closer alignment. But there are other tools which Robert mentioned, like Bluetooth tracking. And in preparation for our work on the Victoria Bridge later this year, we have started some Bluetooth tracking where there are sensors placed around Cambridge now, which are operating that record the Bluetooth signal from vehicles that drive by and sees where they go. And that's all anonymized. Individual vehicles can't be identified or anything like that. And that gives us a good idea, traffic coming in on the main routes into Cambridge, and within Cambridge, where are those trips to and from and what time of day, and that we'll be using that information to help us plan for the inevitable disruption that occurs when the Victoria Street Bridge has major work and we need to partially close it to traffic. But that again will be really good information that can help and feed into our business case in the future. So that's a bit of an update.
Lovely, thanks, Brian. I also acknowledging I guess that regional work that Robert touched on around the Metro Spatial Plan, Transport Plan emerging, is that a workshop is coming to the Service Delivery Committee at our next meeting in terms of providing a further update in terms of how that's progressing as well. So Gary, at this stage, Councillor Gordon, were you wanting to provide further comments?
Just one more point
Gary,
of clarification before we throw to Roger, Dawn, and that relates to the here and now, the current pinch points that we have in the network, and what the strategy says about that.
Yep. So I could perhaps answer that. So using the model, we identified the level of service over the 2-hour peak periods, and we identified those pinch points in both Tiamutu and Cambridge. Within Tiamutu, it was along State Highway 3 and Alexandra Street, which for the local residents would know that those are the pinch points. Within Cambridge, the pinch points are on the 2 bridges, Victoria Street and Victoria Road up to the expressway, and also a lowering of level of service along Hamilton Road. And the strategy does state that those are levels of service over the 2-hour peak period, and that within that 2-hour peak period, the level of service, so that's the average level of service over the 2-hour peak, because that's what the model generates and can display. But obviously within that 2-hour period, we know, like the evening peak is typically 4 till 6, but we know that a lot of people all leave work around 5 and then are travelling, and you get that the travel from Hamilton, which is probably starting to hit Cambridge at 5:30, but then the local traffic from industrial areas is hitting, the network at about 5 o'clock or 5:10. So we know in that peak of the peak that the level of service will be lower, and that's what people in Cambridge do experience now. And so certainly the strategy does recognise that the levels of service shown on the maps will be exacerbated in that peak of the peak. Yeah, so those are areas that they are on those arterial roads, and the business case is aimed at looking at river crossings and arterial roads and what sort of measures will be needed to address those issues going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. So anything else you want to add from the technical strategy perspective, Dawn, and then perhaps throw back to Roger for a comment?
No, I haven't got any further on top of that. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks. Roger, over to you.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick points from that. I think the acknowledgement that both of those data sets are imperfect is relevant to this issue, and whether they're being reviewed or revised in the near future is not relevant to the point now, because we've got to have a look at what that data input was at this point of time. I think in terms of the pinch points that Brian has just made, those levels of service are determined by the projected number of vehicle movements on those stretches of road compared to the capacity that's built in on those sections of roads in the WTRM. My contention is that those capacities in the WTRM are not valid, because we already know that that capacity has been achieved now. So the level of service reflected in the transport strategy in terms of the banding on the map should in fact be a lot lower than what the transportation strategy depicts. I think Mayor Jim's point about if the external information we have, there is a level of imperfection, then we must validate that from local knowledge. And we know in the local knowledge what the development of C2, C3 is in the short term. It's registered, we've got development agreements out there, so we do know what that residential development is going to make in the short term, and that's not reflected in the data set. We also know from our proven traffic counts what our starting point is. So that is current, localized, accurate data, which again is not included in the analysis. So I'll just leave those points, but I'd be really interested at this point to hear what the rest of my colleagues around the table have got to say.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah, absolutely. Throw it open to the councillors now. And in terms of the point I was making, I suppose, was trying just to make sure that the strategy that we put out for comment now, if we assume it proceeds as planned, that we were able to immediately start validating the information in there with that local knowledge and with I suppose more specific surveys and things like that to get that information as accurate as we can. So look, I'll just go around the room, and as the hands come up, starting in the top left-hand corner of my screen, I've got Phil, and then Andrew, and then Liz, and then Claire, and I've no doubt there'll be others, and Mike. So in that sort of order, if we go, Phil?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone, and welcome, Robert, to our discussion. First of all, I mean, it was great having that discussion yesterday around the workshop with the Regional Council, or an update from the Regional Council about for Town Pacific. So that was great. Also support Roger's findings and his documents and everything that he's put together. Yeah, my real priority for this is around the bridge and doing a study on that. So I thank Robert for his little update on NZTA's strategy. But the bridge study is absolutely paramount in my mind, and that will where that bridge is located in the future will really determine the future of our town. And if we get it in the wrong place, then we'll ruin our town. So that's really important. We're not asking for a new bridge straight away now. What we are asking is this corridor to be identified, so that as our town grows, it can grow around that bridge corridor, and developers and property owners and everything like that know where it's going to go. So that's absolutely paramount. And we put funding in the long-term plan to do this study, and it's my understanding that funding is conditional upon some other things before that study actually goes ahead. So what I want to know from this transport review is that it won't be conditional. The funding is going to be available, and the study will go ahead no matter what to determine where this bridge goes. It's absolutely paramount. And business owners are asking for it. Other various members of the community are asking for it. Stakeholders and what have you are asking for it. It's just absolutely paramount that does go ahead. Councillor Webber last week gave us an update on NZTA's projects for now and the future, talking about the Southern Cambridge Expressway extension. There was no updates about the Southern Links, and which sort of gives you an indication that is a long way away. But the Southern Links, in my view, is a project of national significance, where the determination of where an additional bridge for Cambridge goes is a project of community significance, local significance, which will have a really big impact in our future. And so to me, that's absolutely 100% paramount, and my main focus as a councillor, that study goes ahead and that funding is available. And then just lastly, on past the BP garage and St Andrew's Church, the traffic there is at capacity. And the funny thing, the thing is now there's more traffic going past there now, which is local traffic, than what it was before, when it was an expressway and a state highway, before the expressway was open, which was a state highway with traffic running north and south of the country. It's obvious that our population is growing. You can look at the figures as much as you like, but you just look out the window and you can see the traffic jams there at various times a day. And okay, it might only be a few minutes, sitting in a queue now, but we're not talking about just traffic today. We're talking about traffic and movements in the future, and how the town's going to lay out. So our town, as it gets bigger, is getting better and better in my view. But we've got to ensure that the study goes ahead, and where that bridge ends up being will determine the future of our town, and that's just very important. So thank you for allowing me to talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Andrew.
Thanks, Jim. And thanks, Robert. Very interesting to get that perspective on how these strategies are and should be put together. And I quite see that we can't simply use a data set that we have concocted ourselves without reference to the rest of the district, notwithstanding that I accept that Roger's work and all of the trouble he's gone to collecting information. A lot of what Roger's got is predicting the future as well, of course, and I can guarantee that that's not going to be entirely accurate. So what I've understood so far from this morning is that the strategy that our team have come up with is in fact entirely appropriate, fit for purpose, and allows us to get on with the work of looking at the business case that we in fact have got to convince Waka Kotahi of before a third bridge can be progressed in a sensible manner. So yeah, I think our team's done a really good job by the sound of it. Yeah, thanks for that.
Thanks, Andrew. Liz.
Thanks, Jim. Hey, yeah, my sentiments, I guess, along with Andrew. We've always talked about Nydia. Nydia data over my term as a councillor has popped up time and time again as being imperfect. And I think, whenever we look at this, any information that comes through on population data, transportation data, it is always imperfect, but we can't let that stop us in our strategy. So, yeah, very, very, I guess, supportive of continuing. But I guess for me, just picking up on some of the earlier points around the holistic approach, we have large emissions and congestion, I think, aspirations. And now our transport strategy has gone out now to our community so that we can hear about just how strong those aspirations actually are. So we can make some kind of commitment to our community about, what our targets are actually going to be, or how we're going to, work all this through. So I want to make sure that we're all keeping a really an open mind around our community, and we need to wait to hear from them and really encourage them to think really innovatively. This is our opportunity to make some real change and really listen to those aspirations, because we just don't necessarily know what those are, or how far our community actually wants us to go. So I really appreciate rural residents are in a different category. They obviously need to use the road to get into town. But in our urban areas, there's some real choices around public transport, cycleways, all of our active nodes. They need to work well, and they also need to be really, really safe. So I just really want to make sure that, we're really thinking outside the box here, and that we encourage our community to think outside the box so we can make our community really, really attractive. So I'm just really, I don't want to put negative connotations out there in our papers and things now about this strategy. I just want our community to think really aspirationally, and we engage really thoughtfully and listen really, really well about what those targets and what I guess our kids want for their future, and how our towns are going to be shaped. So yeah, I'm just disappointed that there might just be some negative stuff out there in the community, and I just want to turn that around now and just make sure that's positive. We're here to listen. I really want to, we've made commitments, nationally around emissions, how are we going to achieve that? This is the time for our communities to really step up and be aspirational about what they want. So I'm really here, I'm listening. Yes, I know about the third bridge. We're not here to talk about specifically what we want. That'll come out later. But we all know we need, to make some changes, to our town, and there's lots of difficult parts. But let's think really innovatively as well. What does the future hold around driverless cars? How's that going to affect what our towns are going to look like? That's stuff I really want to kind of hear from our communities about. So just want to throw that in now. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. Claire.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to have this forum to review the transport strategy, and I acknowledge the work that Roger's done, and I really appreciate having Robert here actually to put in a really understandable language, the whole purpose of doing the strategy and what's the evidence behind all of the data that it's based on. And I found it really helpful. So from my point of view, I'm worried that we have the report, the consultation document that's going to go out to our community, particularly Cambridge. And what we have is the model that's generated, you know, a lot of the, I suppose, assumptions or the recommendations about the transport strategy, you know, what the future is going to look like. And there's a mismatch between that because of the limitations of the model. There's limitations between that, or a mismatch between that and what local knowledge will be, particularly in Cambridge, where you'll get this, oh, it's wrong, we already know that there's a problem and it hasn't taken these other things into account. Now, Robert's given a really good explanation, and also Dawn, about why there might be, you know, those differences. But I'm worried that council's reputation is going to take a hit because of that, of the mismatch. And I'm wondering whether or not there's an opportunity to put more messaging around that regardless of, you know, that this is what we're working with, and we appreciate that there are mismatches. But the important thing is the recommendations of the report. You know, what's it pointing to? It's pointing to doing a business case for a third bridge, and as Liz has so well articulated, about the future aspirations, because we know that our emissions are a problem where we need to make changes. We're looking at more active modes. So I don't know if there's any opportunity there, Gary, to do some extra messaging on that, so that at least we can mitigate some of that sort of knee-jerk reaction that council's got it completely wrong and they're idiots. I do take the situation with Southern Links, you know, sort of being slowed down as an indication that even Waka Kotahi are also reviewing their sort of their business as usual approach, where they know that there's growth, and so they're going to build infrastructure to cope with increased volumes, where in actual fact what they're probably doing is seeing whether or not they can pull back on that kind of investment, because they know that there's going to be pressure to reduce the level of private vehicle use and streamline a lot of our other transportation activity. That's all. So yeah, but, I really appreciate that forum. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Claire. Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Yeah, Claire, very well said, I thought, very well said, and covered off a lot of the points that I was going to cover, so I'm not going to cover those again. I'll just really say one statement, and that is, I think the fundamental issue that this discussion is about is, for me, is not about the strategy. I think that sounded is really good hearing Robert. I'm a first-term councillor, and I actually learned a whole heap. So thank you, Robert, for your insight there, and again making it so succinctly clear for even those with like Pooh Bear of little brain. But I think really it's just about, and you sort of stated, we can't seek perfect numbers. However, we should look at better numbers if we have access to them. And I think that's really the fundamentals, and Claire mentioned about communication and brought Gary into that, or comms team, of, hey, I think what the document, I'm actually comfortable with the document, but I think the public deserve that. Actually, we're working to a model, and we've understood why we need to work to that model, and Robert, you explained that, so I won't go into that, and that made sense to me. However, we do have local information that really we haven't included, that as part of the business case, we will include this, and that is that local subdivision stuff and all the rest of it. That, though I sort of agree with Andrew in a way that you can't predict the future, but if we're consenting stuff, developers aren't doing this on a whim, so they're not consenting X amount of lots to go broke. So we can probably take that with reasonable accuracy. I think the public will just, if we just got something out around this, the strategy, there is better local information. These are the sorts of things that is the local information we have. You don't even have to give the numbers, but it's not part of that bigger picture, and why we have to give those bigger picture numbers, which I guess is part of the future-proof metro spatial plan, those sort of numbers. So yeah, just a bit more local information to comment out that this is the plan. Hey, it's not perfect. We do have some local numbers that can feed into this, and whether you put some of those in there or not, I'm not sure. But I agree. I think there's risk for reputational damage when we're sitting on some information, and Roger's dug up a whole lot of things here. And and it's good to see that part of the business plan, as Robert said, would be to validate or otherwise some of the stuff that Roger's brought up. But some of it's probably fundamentally fairly sound in terms of some of these lot numbers, etc. That bigger picture just hasn't quite got. Thank you.
Yeah, Roger.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Jim. Just a couple of comments. First of all, I've always supported and acknowledged the business plan towards looking at the corridor for a third bridge. If you look at those bullet points that I raised earlier, the concern that I have is, I do mention the bridge at the end, but I think it's the impact on the rest of the Cambridge network and that impact needs to be addressed now. We've got now a challenge in terms of the traffic buildup in Cambridge. So we really need to address that now. And part of that is the bridge, but part of it is where all that other traffic is going to go. So it's the overall network that I'm concerned about, as well as the bridge. And I think one of the things we've got to do as a council is go out and acknowledge to our community of Cambridge that there is currently a problem that we're willing to look at and solve now.
Thanks, Roger. I don't see any more hands coming up, but just look, my take on this is, look, we've got a strategy that we've gone out to the public already, and we need to rely on the process that's well established. These issues need to be sorted through that process, and we are going to get submissions, obviously, on the transport strategy, and we, from a council perspective, we've got to be careful that what we're saying and doing is not contrary, or that we demonstrate that we've got a fixed view before we get these comments coming in. So effectively, my view is that it's got to run its course. I acknowledge that there are concerns that have been raised by councillors already, but we need to let the community have their say on the strategy, sift through all of the issues that come forward. There may be refinements, but and we do then need to start working with some urgency on some of the business cases for improvements that need to be, or that we perceive need to be made. But we need justification before we leap in and with the knee-jerk reactions that we criticise central government for all of the time. But look, I just think the strategy now that we've got it to the position that we are in, it's out there for public comment, and we just need to be careful that we are maintaining an open mind when we listen to the comments that come back through. So, look, Gary, I'll hand back to you. I'm not sure whether any other councils want to.
Yeah, Jim, Graham.
Sorry, Graham. Yeah.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I just wanted to say, great to have Rodney. I've worked with Rodney, and I really appreciate what you have to say, Robert. Fantastic. There's been some good stuff, so I haven't got too much to say, except, which is probably unusual for me, there are criteria, there are rules with NZTA, and they are 50. They will have to be, or will partner a 50-50 amount of money to the councils. We cannot afford to go alone, because the burden, if we do that, will be too high for our ratepayers. It'd be just immense. So I'm just going to finish off by saying that I think that the strategy that we're going down in the business case that we're building will be the driver for, as you say, Rodney, the they're getting some funding. As I pointed out to Council the other day, sitting on the Land Transport Committee, there's no extension from the expressway to Pairiri mooted until 2027 to 2030. And I've got that document that shows that. So this is a little way out. But what I'm worried about is people going out and saying, the bridge should go here, the bridge could go there. It is not doing your council any good by identifying those things in your mind. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Graham.
Jim,
Okay.
sorry, I've got to run. I've got a medical appointment, please. So can I leave now, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Graham. Thanks for your comments and all the best on the appointment.
Thank you.
Okay. Were there any other? Lou, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I tend to agree very, very much. Firstly, Robert, I'd like to thank you very much for a lot of information. Along like Councillor Pettit, I'm a first-time councillor, and just seeing how the operation actually works. And I can understand that although the original collection of data can be perceived to be a bit incorrect, and is possibly incorrect at this present point in time, we have a business case which we would put in place when we do this. I do agree with some of the comments that Councillor Webber just made, that it's not a good thing to have everybody looking at a new position for the bridge at this point in time, because we will have to build this case over time to create that locality. And if we have investors and people wishing to purchase properties with a perception that a bridge is going to be in that, it's only going to drive things up and make it terribly, terribly difficult for us to actually even buy the place. We would need a considered and optional approach. And I think what we've done with our draft plan is the right perception. I do think that we can put our draft plan out. I congratulate the staff for what they've done. I think it's a great, great job. And it really has, as I say, the ability to be modified and certainly considered with the consideration of Waikato and the other councils over time.
Thanks, Lou.
Thanks, Lou. Well said.
Yeah. Gary, have you got any other comments you wish to make?
Councillor Clare and Councillor Mike raised the issue around communications rising out of this discussion. We'll turn our mind to that, but we're all aware that this has been a publicly streamed session. And so I know that the press who have been concerned about this matter have been watching this session. So I'm sure that'll all be reported accurately, but we'll also look at some comms to support the transport strategy. And particularly to your point, Liz, there's some great things in the strategy that we really need to ensure people are engaged on and give us their feedback about. So that was a very good commentary. Thank you for that.
Okay. All right. So obviously a workshop, but is everyone comfortable that they've had their say and that we're going to continue moving forward? Is that the position that I've got? I see Andrew's put his thumbs up. Mike, you wanted to comment?
I'm happy with that. I'd just like to thank you, Robert. I'm going to keep this quote, that driving for perfection is the enemy of progress. I think that's absolutely great. Thank you.
Well said, Mike. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. Were there, as I say, any other comments? But if not, we can just take this as we're just progressing with the strategy, not with the conclusions that have been drawn from it already, because that's the next step, really. So let's get some feedback from the community as much as possible, Liz, as you said, in a positive light. Maybe some criticisms of the strategy, but that's fine. We can work through those, but we just need to keep moving forward. Otherwise, we're going to just stall on this. Everyone comfortable?
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. And just to reiterate the point you made, keeping an open mind in relation to the submissions that come through on the strategy is essential. And I'll just need to have a chat with Councillor Gordon a bit later on about how we might deal with the material he's produced. We can take that up as a submission to the strategy, but just need to think about how we might use that.
Yeah, thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
And thanks, Roger, for all of the effort that you put in looking at it, because I know whether it's a transportation strategy or the district plan or any of the other issues and the concern that we've got, it would be fantastic to have cast iron figures to make our predictions, and then we would always be right. But with the information we've got, there's gaps in it, and we need to refine those. But it's the best information we've got. And I see you've got your hand up, so I'll leave it for you to make the last comment.
Thanks, Mayor Jim. Look, mine was just to say it's obviously that the failing of the workshop is that we go forward with a strategy. So I accept that, and we'll put that to one side. I'm also very happy that this has been a public session because it has enabled me to make my concerns public over the transport strategy, and hopefully some of those concerns will be reflected in the constituency feedback that we get on the transportation strategy. So like others, I'm really looking forward to getting that feedback and seeing where we go from here, and the fact that some of those issues will be addressed in the short term as well. Thank you. Thanks,
Roger. It's a pity that Ukraine and Russia couldn't resolve their issues in the same civilized manner, isn't it? Okay, I don't think there's anything else we've got to discuss, Gary, is there? That concludes the workshop?
No, that's